I'm Jonathan Larsen with the Young Turks, and we have no scheduled topic for today, which I'm going to explain why right now. So we do these every weekday, right? TYTI daily. That's the idea. We do these every weekday. And the idea is to provide some insight or context to new reporting that we've done, or to provide analysis, commentary, context of something that's in the news, right? And so there are two kinds of stories that I can do that with. There are stories that I think are not getting enough attention, and I want to amplify to whatever humble effect I can and maybe offer some context. And then there are stories that everyone's talking about, where hopefully I can do the same, talk about some unexamined aspect of it. And what this requires is for me to have some idea what the hell I'm talking about. And at the moment, today, just frankly, there are important stories out there that that merit talking about, but I didn't have the resources to bring something useful to the conversation. And so I didn't want to bring something that was bullshit to the conversation just for the sake of having something to say. And I also didn't want to jump on stories that everyone is talking about that I could very easily have an opinion on, that are bullshit stories, that are stories about things that don't actually have a direct impact on people's lives. I didn't want to give them that oxygen. And I do, at the risk of patting myself on the back, I do feel like a big problem with our media is that the challenge of succeeding in the ratings or whatever, or clicks, whatever your equivalent is such that you if you don't have the resources to say something interesting and compelling about stories that aren't already in the churn, then it's super easy and usually pays off to just blather on, give your opinion on stories that don't matter. Right? There's the Chris Cuomo thing, which it's like, whose life does this affect? We just posted a video earlier today of Ken Cuccinelli from U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services talking about the new rule that the Trump administration has, where they're going to essentially penalize legal immigrants, documented immigrants, who are going through the process towards a green card, citizenship, whatever it might be. If they use government services, food stamps, Medicare, things like that, then that'll be held against them when a determination is made on their citizenship. And I've got lots of thoughts about that, but I'm not super read up on it. And frankly, my big take on the whole Statue of Liberty issue that's come up with him, I did something literally on the Statue of Liberty a few weeks ago. Maybe I should go back and retweet that. But in any case, it just felt like I didn't have something new to bring to the table. And rather than just sort of like re-whip up outrage and moral umbrage, I thought best to resist the lure of the endless hamster wheel and maybe just be a little bit more transparent and open about it and say, what's on your folks' minds? Let's talk about that. So, with that said, I see off in my peripheral vision here that you folks do have stuff to say. So I'm going to wheel over there real quickly and see what it is. Nick Keith says hi. Hi, Nick Keith. I don't think we've seen you in the chat room before, so welcome aboard. Reptile Z says hi, peeps. Alma says that is why I like TYT. Can you be more specific? Nick Keith says, amen, bring us cake or shut up. So I feel like you're on my side on this, but I'm not exactly sure. So I'd love for you to flesh that out a little bit more. No Middle Ground says, morning, Jonathan. What the hell is going on with the new immigration rules? So again, my caveat, I haven't done the required reading to speak authoritatively on this, but I think the summary that I gave a few minutes ago is basically the idea. There is some rule going back, some law apparently going back to the late 1800s about immigrants being on the public charge, or words to that effect, which according to Cuccinelli has never been super well defined. And now the Trump administration is implementing a definition that takes into account whether you've received government assistance at any point. And of course, there are lots of philosophical pushbacks to this. You know, the number of immigrants who came here legally or otherwise, required public assistance, and then did fantastically well and were fantastic benefits to society, assuming we need to limit the definition of who we will take in by what's in it for us. Not to mention, it doesn't seem, as far as I can tell, the new rule doesn't seem to take into account the economic stimulus the people provide, right? It's only how much did you take. There doesn't seem to be any consideration to how much did you give in terms of not just taxes paid, but also what they produce, right? There are companies, not just along the borders, that are calling out, that are pressuring hard for labor, the labor for immigrant labor, and the economy overall. And I don't mean to dismiss the argument over wages, right? The idea is that if they're not documented or if they're coming in and they're impoverished, they're willing to take lower wages than people who don't have those concerns would be willing to take, and that depresses wages. So setting that aside a little bit, they help the economy by working for these companies that need the labor. So none of that seems to have been taken into consideration in these new rules, leading to questions about whether or not it's targeting Latinos, who I believe make up the lion's share of the immigrant population. Okay, let's see what else you guys are saying. Nick Keith says, our country is being stolen. We are being used as toilet paper by Trump and the rich. Well, I guess I think the "our country is being stolen" rhetoric is a little bit dangerous in the sense that, I mean, I just did a commentary yesterday, Nick, about that kind of language being used towards the invaders. Our country is being stolen. That's a very sort of existential threat. It essentially suggests that America itself is in jeopardy. And if you accept that as a logical premise, then that justifies a lot of extreme, violent, militaristic action. It can be used to justify things like the El Paso shooting. And I don't think we want to endorse that kind of language here, because we may want to be maximalist in the sense of emphasizing how bad we think something is. But if we put it in terms of our country is being stolen, that suggests that extra legal measures are needed to save it. But that's not true. It's not being stolen. It's being changed through the system. And the country is whatever the system produces. The system gives us all the means we need to make this country what we or I or you think it ought to be. So when we say stolen, that suggests that we need an extra legal remedy. And I think that's precisely the wrong way to go here. I think the legal political remedies are all right in front of us, not just every 4 years, all the time. And our own laxity, if that's a word, as activist citizens means that you can steal the country from us through perfectly legal means, right? It's not Trump. It's been both parties for many decades now that have weakened labor rights, that have enabled income redistribution to the top 1%. All of these things have been done over decades prior to Trump, and with the full cooperation and collaboration of both parties. The Wall Street excesses that brought us to 2008 were not just allowed but incentivized by laws that were passed in the final days of the Clinton administration. So I don't think I think it's a bad idea to say our country is being stolen from us, but I also think it's a blinkered view of the history that got us here. I tend to, in general, think that it lets Republicans off the hook to say that Trump is an aberration, but it lets both parties off the hook to say that the course we're on is an aberration. Alma says, you are sincere if you are not completely knowable in a subject. and start to bobble on it for the sake of having something to talk about. You like facts and evidence. I like that too. Thank you, Alma. That's kind of you to say. I'm not, I'm rarely, if ever, completely knowledgeable on a subject. They call journalism the first draft of history, and I try to do my best on those, but I do think there's sort of a minimum threshold where if you can't talk responsibly about a subject that you know, and you don't want to talk about a subject that's irresponsible to give oxygen, then maybe shut up. Okay, let's see. Nick Keith says, I think I'm catching in the middle ground there. Nick Keith says, can individual states overstep the federal government and write their own laws about undocumented workers? To some extent, sure. And we're seeing that clash play out a little bit, not even with laws being written, but for obvious reasons, immigration law has federal aspects. It's a lot easier for states to enact independent measures, like we've seen with California doing with the car makers recently, when there aren't obvious interstate issues where the federal government sort of can claim a serious jurisdiction. Let's see. I'm afraid I can't read your name there, but it says, teach the locals so they may benefit rather than flee. I don't understand that. Perry McCorkle says, I think Nick Keith meant that conservatives are the ones that have stolen the country. Well, that might have been what Nick Keith meant. I'm sure Nick Keith can weigh in for himself. But again, I think the language of stolen the country is dangerously vague and imprecise, and it creates, it facilitates a mindset that provides moral justification for extralegal, violent, criminal action to fix it. So I think I have a problem with pretty much in the phrase stolen the country. I have a problem with every word except the. They're not stealing the country. They're literally rewriting the laws. That means it's not stealing. And it's not the country, it's certain aspects of our civic existence, right? The country's still here. You can see it behind my cheesy middle school theater program background. The country's still here. We just don't like what's going on with it. Immigrants are not stealing the country, and neither is Trump. No one is stealing the country. If we, as a people, are so passive that we allow people in power, first of all, we allow people to get in power who then want to change things, then we're giving it away. They're not stealing it from us. We are giving it away every day by letting them do this, because there are, look at Hong Kong. Look at Hong Kong. If you want to talk about a situation where a country may be in danger of being stolen, that's that situation. And if you're not familiar, they've had protests. Right now, they're currently occupying the airport, but they've had protests for weeks because of new laws that are being implemented that are changing the dynamic between Hong Kong and essentially and China. Hong Kong has had some degree of sovereignty since it reverted back to Chinese control, but pro-China forces within Hong Kong are essentially breaking down those barriers. And it started with an extradition law where it would be easier to extradite people from Hong Kong to mainland China, where it's a lot easier for government forces and people in power to exert their will through the judicial system. So they're fighting in a very real way, but they've literally shut down airports. We're not shutting down airports. And you can argue, yes, that's also a criminal action, but there's a difference between civil disobedience and uncivil disobedience. And that's I think, when you say they're stealing the country, you're calling for uncivil disobedience. And we've affected change in this country much more dramatic than we're talking about now through civil disobedience in the past. So I think we ought to veer away from the language of stole our country. No, you stole our country. because it's imprecise, because it's wrong, because it absolves the masses of having to do something, and because it creates a mindset that justifies bad things. That's my take. Nick Keith says, absolutely, I blame the right. I just went home to Iowa for 2 funerals. My own family blames immigrants and was using the N-word. I was shocked and appalled and ashamed. That's obviously a horrible scenario, but that's not your country being stolen. That's your family being part of it. Excuse me. Yeah, your own family. So that's not theft. That's people winning the argument in the marketplace of ideas. And that just means that the other side, the other people in the marketplace of ideas, need to do better, both in the civic discourse, but also politically. Let's see. Let's see what else we got. Someone whose name I can't pronounce, it ends in gentes or gentes, says liberals, all caps, don't understand economic. And that's the end of it. So, okay. Let's see. We got a shout out from No Middle Ground for the JV backdrop. Thank you. One of these days I will show what's behind that. It'll have to be a very special occasion, but yeah. And it'll be entirely anticlimactic, just so we're clear here on the record. Okay, now it looks like you guys are just fighting with yourselves. So maybe I should just go take care of my laundry and get back to work while you guys fight amongst yourselves. Okay, Gentes or Gente says, watching the little girl cry on TV was awesome. Her father broke our laws by coming in without a visa. So, I want to be as clear as possible that that's an appalling / monstrous moral position to take, but I think it's important to understand, which doesn't mean condone, but to understand how a functioning person in the 21st century can say it's awesome to watch a little girl cry because of something her father did. And I'm not sure exactly how to get there. But especially when I think here's part of it. He says, or she says, her father broke our laws by coming in without a visa. And that might be true. The question is, what moral weight do we put on broke our laws by coming in without a visa? And in the law, if my understanding is correct, that's a misdemeanor, along the lines with jaywalking and things like that. And if a grown man took his daughter across the street jaywalking by the hand because she's a minor, and they got hit by a car, the normal human reaction is to say that's tragic for her and for him. We're not supposed to endorse outsized punitive consequences for what we consider trivial or minor moral transgressions. But what has happened in our discourse is that precisely because of that maximalist discourse, rhetoric being applied to immigration, it's an invasion, it's an army, it's criminals, the act itself has come to be seen as morally monstrous, such that an otherwise rational, I'm assuming, person can be comfortable with consequences that are hugely disproportionate being visited not only on the transgressor, but on their minor children. And this is not unique to Trump or Trump supporters. We do that in war, and Democrats have justified that terrorism is so scary, and I'm so afraid, and the possibility of one single American being killed due to terrorism is so untenable that I'm willing to kill children in order to kill suspects in countries thousands of miles away. So that calculus strikes us appropriately as horrific and depraved when it's articulated against a crying little girl, but but that's just an application of that calculus to a new thing. We've already accepted that calculus in some circumstances. So I think it's important that we unpack where those ideas get traction, right? They get traction in the most extreme cases. That's why terrorism's so effective, right? It gives you the opening to permit tactics and mindsets that were utterly unacceptable before. Back when we were grown-ups, we considered the torture of enemies a crime, and we prosecuted US soldiers for it. Once terrorism made it acceptable to do that, acceptable to see people as monsters, once those things get normalized, they can be exported by otherwise rational, otherwise even compassionate people, because it's now a calculus that you're allowed to perform, and which means it's just a question of which variables are you putting in. So I think that's part of the lesson we ought to take away from this. So I'll shut up now. See if you guys are saying something other than fighting amongst yourselves. Let's see. Nick Keith says, well, what I saw in Iowa was a lot of wealthy white folks living high on the hog and blaming immigrants. They have no homeless people. Brown people are immediately pulled over. I got pulled over. Well, I'm sorry that happened to you, of course, and I'm sorry that's happening at all, and it shouldn't happen. But again, when I say that it's wrong to say they're stealing our country, I'm not disagreeing with your moral position. I'm talking about the effect of the language that we use to describe that moral position. We can say something is wrong. We can say something goes against American precedent and history without suggesting that the essential existential nature of America itself is going to be killed or stolen. For one thing, that it shuts us off from what we can do about it, I think. The Democratic Party controls one of the houses of Congress, and there are still Democratic judges out there. So if you don't like what the Republican Party is doing, there are Democrats in power who can do something about it. And yes, I'm not saying that things like illegal voter suppression happen. Of course they happen, and that's a bad thing. But again, there are legal remedies for these things. And by the way, in case this all sounds dire and bleak, if you're concerned that the Trump administration is doing things that you don't find American, the polls suggest that most people agree with you, and that has two possible effects. One is it means that some people in his camp now will start to move away, which we've already seen that. And also it means that the people, when they get to vote next year, are likely to vote him out. And if there's widespread voter fraud, meaning fraud against voters, not by voters, then maybe you've got some kind of claim for a literalist interpretation of stole our country from us. But at the moment, what they're doing is not outside the bounds of the methods that have been used by past presidents and past people in power, and the mindset and the thinking and the calculus that have been used by those people. No middle ground says, no, we must never see how the sausage is made behind the background. I feel like this is the sausage. Isn't this the sausage being made right here? That's just the kitchen wall. But fair enough. You know what? You're right. The mystery is the suspense is what keeps keeps it alive. So let's see. Patrick Seguin. I'm not sure if I'm not saying that correctly. Says Americans broke the law with illegal wars, causing this problem with regime change. It's called blowback. Yeah, that's another really good point, right? Is that virtually all the refugee issues that we're seeing at our southern border and around the world have ties to Western powers meddling in other countries, or in an increasing number of cases, climate change, of which we are the primary, if not most significant driver, ruining the environments in which they live, messing up the food chains there, messing up water supplies, all kinds of things. So the idea that to cast it as an invasion is sort of doubly horrific in that sense, that many of the triggers and causes for these migrations of individual human beings have their roots in Washington, D.C. Elke Vermeulen, I'm not sure if I'm saying that correctly, sorry, says, yay, I caught you live. I promise not to give you any direct compliments, sir. Well, I think I appreciate that. I understand the spirit in which it's meant. If you weren't here previously, I responded stupidly to something nice that Elke or someone else said, and I tried to explain that I'm very bad at taking compliments. So I usually try to just go with a quick, simple, unscrew-upable, thank you very much. Let's see. Patrick Seguin says, ICE are Gestapo terrorist police, are taxpayer terrorists. So again, I don't think the rhetoric helps, and here's where I'm going to get in trouble with you guys. It's really important, I think, for people to want to signal just how committed they are to a moral position. And the best, easiest way to do that is by going to extremes to condemn the other moral position. The problem is that's the easiest way to do that. It's not the best way to do that. And I worry sometimes that the resistance or whatever uses that maximalist language, not because it's been shown to have some great galvanizing effect. Martin Luther King, I think, did not use that kind of language. And so I'm concerned that its primary purpose is to make ourselves feel good and righteous and on the right side. And so I don't intend to say this about you, but I'm talking about the general trend of seeing that kind of maximalist language. And it also blinds us to the realities of how systemic and institutional forces work when we just say Gestapo or terrorist, because those things have become synonymous with evil. And evil, as scholars of World War II will tell you, evil is not a good framework with which to understand the Holocaust or World War II. Those acts are evil, but the question that the 20th century never fully grappled with, and we're now still grappling with unsuccessfully, is how is it that an entire country or more that 5-10 years before we considered relatively morally average, how is it that an entire country comes to embrace these things which are clearly recognized from the outside as evil, and just labeling the people as if there were a virus that suddenly turned everyone evil? That's not helpful. And it means that we don't actually, if that's our explanatory mechanism for how it happens, that means we can never be on guard for how it really happens. Uh, we can never effectively implement mindsets and systems and ways of thinking and talking that guard against it. So that's maybe that makes me an accommodationalist or whatever the word is, but and I'm certainly not embracing very fine people, but if you shut the door to people finding their way out of a mindset that is evil, then they'll stay in there. And their numbers will just increase, and they'll become better and better at defending being in there. And they'll use your own maximalism as a way to weaponize other people and to radicalize other people. So I think we need to do better and work harder to combat what are maximalist wrongs without using maximalist language about the people committing them. So that's my spiel on that. Patrick Seguin says, people must break unjust laws. Well, I think the lame answer to that is it depends. And I think certainly we're seeing movements towards that when people's lives are on the line with sanctuary cities, and there was some denomination, I think the entire denomination last week maybe declared itself a sanctuary for undocumented immigrants being pursued by ICE or what have you. So civil disobedience, I think, is an appropriate, time-tested and honorable method of not just protecting the individuals who are vulnerable to unjust laws, but to changing those laws, right? That's the ultimate goal, is to galvanize political activism to the point where the way the laws are seen changes, so that people now understand them to be wrong, or at least implementable for the wrong. No Middle Ground says, why do we have ICE? And of course the answer to that is 9/11. And I think I've said enough about terrorism and what fear drives us to do to be clear on that. Progress 101 says, we need to be taught in school about the CIA involvement in foreign governments. We need to understand how lobbying works and what's going on in other countries, like single-payer healthcare, et cetera, et cetera. Well, if Howard Zinn Middle School opens up anytime soon, I'd be interested to hear about it. But certainly you're right that I wasn't a great history student, but I enjoyed aspects of it, and I respected and liked my teacher back in high school. I didn't take as much of it as I should in college, but there are so many stories out there that don't get told, and partly I think that's out of fear of provoking controversy, just at mentioning these things, right? We've seen the battle for decades over getting things in, taking things out of textbooks. So, and just to open up another hobby horse, I tend to agree with you on those subject matters, but I also think that our critical thinking skills are woefully underdeveloped, at least through academia, including through college, and to some extent the inability of some people in power on the right to sort of acknowledge and embrace facts, I blame on the left, not necessarily today, but not necessarily not today, but historically, beginning as far back as the 60s and into the 70s, the left has endorsed this idea that, hey man, whatever works for you, if you want to believe it, I respect your opinion. And opinion, the word opinion has gotten warped to mean your assessment of factual things, right? That's ice cream is not an opinion. That's vanilla ice cream is not an opinion. That's good ice cream is an opinion. But we've warped things enough so much that it's now your opinion that that's ice cream. And so and a lot of the left thinks, well, if it's an opinion, then I guess it deserves respect. Well, fascism is an opinion, and I would say does not deserve respect. intolerance does not deserve tolerance. So I think the left has yet to sort of fully grapple with maybe the overreach of I don't know if relativism is the right word, but I think you understand the point I'm trying to make. And I'm going to wrap it up soon because I'm just having one conversation with myself and you guys are having another. So I've done this totally wrong. Let's see. Progress 101, yeah. No Middle Ground says, yeah, it used to be called civics and political science. Yeah, we could use more of it, I think. Okay. DLJ says, ask you anything. Okay, what's the most misspelled word in the English language? Well, minuscule and accordion are certainly up there. But there are probably other more common words that get misspelled more often. I'm curious to hear what the answer is. Now I'm checking to see if you misspelled, just to be tricky about it. Anyway, DLJ, I encourage you to give us the answer before we go. I gave you my guesses. Wait, was it? DLJ says, wait, awkward? Awkward is misspelled? How do you misspell awkward? What other way would you spell awkward? I think I disagree. I think there's probably words that are misspelled more often. But I'm glad we can go out on a light note. It's like local news, right? This is the water skiing squirrel of AMAs. All right. With that, I'm gonna pledge to you that I will try to find something substantive to discuss tomorrow that matters, not just that everyone's talking about, even though it doesn't matter. Usually this is the point where I say, if you enjoy our content and you find it worthwhile, please share and subscribe to us here on TYT Investigates. But today I basically stole your content and used it for my nefarious clickbait purposes. So I can't really make that request of you, although I do hope you'll do it anyway. And like and follow us over on Facebook. And take care of yourselves and have a great day. See you tomorrow. Bye.